Every empire that ever collapsed had one thing in common. It wasn't the debt. It wasn't the inflation. It wasn't even the war. It was the moment ordinary people looked at each other and realized nobody was telling the truth anymore. That moment is closer than you think. And the story of how we got here, the real story, the one they will never teach you in any economics class, is darker and stranger than you've been told. Because the next financial crisis, the one that's already taking shape in the shadows right now, won't be a test of your portfolio. It won't be a test of your savings account or your credit score. It will be a test of who you actually are when the lights go out and the ATMs stop working. It will be a test of character. And most people are going to fail. Let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in October of 1929. Not to Wall Street. Everyone tells that story. I want to take you to a small apartment building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where a 43-year-old bookkeeper named Arthur Berman is sitting at his kitchen table at 5:15 in the morning. His wife is still asleep. His two daughters, 9 and 12, are curled up in the next room. Arthur hasn't slept. He's been staring at a piece of paper, a margin call from his brokerage, for 6 straight hours. He owes $4,000 he does not have. That's roughly $70,000 in today's money. His entire life savings, gone. Not because he was reckless, not because he was greedy, but because every single person he trusted, his broker, his banker, his newspaper, his congressman, told him the market was safe. They told him prosperity was permanent. They told him he'd be a fool not to borrow money and invest it. And Arthur believed them. Because why wouldn't you believe the people who are supposed to know? Here's what the textbooks never tell you about financial crises. They don't start with numbers. They start with trust. Specifically, they start with the abuse of trust. Somebody in a position of authority looks you in the eye and tells you something they either know is false or haven't bothered to verify. And you believe them because believing them is easier than doing the work yourself. That's the trap. Not greed, not stupidity, trust. The most human instinct we have is the very thing that gets weaponized against us every single time the cycle repeats. And the cycle always repeats. Always. Because the people who profit from your trust have no incentive to be honest with you. Their bonuses, their promotions, their political careers, all of it depends on you staying calm and staying invested right up until the moment the floor drops out. Arthur Berman didn't jump from a window. That's a myth about 1929, by the way. The suicide rate barely ticked up that October. What actually happened was worse. Arthur survived. He went back to work. He took a second job. He spent the next 11 years clawing his way back to zero. Not to wealth, just to zero. And by the time he got there, the world was at war again, and his oldest daughter's husband was shipping out to North Africa. Arthur never talked about the crash. He never warned anyone. He just got quieter, year by year, until he was the kind of man who could sit in a room full of people and not be noticed at all. That's what a financial crisis actually does. It doesn't just empty your bank account. It empties you. Now, let's talk about the architecture of the lie. Because there is a blueprint, and it's been used over and over again, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. The blueprint has 3 stages. Stage 1 is the story. Stage 2 is the machine. Stage 3 is the silence. The story always comes first. In the 1920s, the story was permanent prosperity. The United States had won the Great War. Factories were humming. Electricity was spreading to every home, and a new invention called the radio was knitting the country together into a single audience for the first time in history. And what did that audience hear? They heard advertisements for stocks. They heard politicians bragging about growth. They heard economists, a profession that was barely 30 years old at that point, explaining in confident tones why the old rules of boom and bust no longer applied. Sound familiar? It should. Because in the late 1990s, the story was the new economy. The internet had changed everything, we were told. Old metrics like profits and revenue were outdated. What mattered now was eyeballs and clicks and market share. Companies with no earnings and no products were valued at billions of dollars. And anyone who raised a hand and said, "This doesn't make sense," was laughed out of the room. The story adapts. It shapeshifts. In 2006, the story was, housing never goes down. In 2021, the story was, everything is going up forever. Money printer go brr. The words change. The confidence doesn't. And that confidence is not an accident. It is manufactured. It is the product of a very deliberate system designed to keep you calm while your pockets are being picked. That brings us to stage 2, the machine. Let me tell you about a man named Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, born in 1891, and arguably the most dangerous man of the 20th century, though you've probably never heard his name. Bernays took his uncle's theories about the subconscious mind and asked a simple question. If people can be understood through their hidden desires and fears, can they also be controlled through those same desires and fears? The answer, as it turned out, was yes. Spectacularly, terrifyingly, yes. In 1928, Bernays published a book called Propaganda. Not a secret document, a bestseller, right there on the shelf, and in it, he wrote something that should chill you to the bone. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power. He wasn't hiding it. He was bragging about it. And the financial industry was listening. See, before Bernays, Wall Street had a problem. The average American didn't trust banks. For good reason. Banks had been collapsing, stealing deposits, and ruining families since the 1800s. The Panic of 1893 alone wiped out over 500 banks. People kept their money in mattresses, in coffee cans, buried in the yard. They didn't invest because investing felt like gambling, which honestly it was. Wall Street needed a way to change that feeling, not the reality, the feeling. And Bernays showed them how. You don't sell people a product, you sell them an identity. You don't tell them to buy stocks. You tell them that smart, modern, successful Americans buy stocks. You make investing a status symbol. You make caution look like cowardice. You make the man who keeps his money in a savings account look like a fool, and the man who leverages himself to the hilt look like a visionary. This is the machine. It is not a conspiracy. It is something worse. It is a culture that has been carefully, deliberately, and expensively constructed over the last 100 years to make you feel that your worth as a human being is directly tied to your net worth. And when the crisis comes, when the numbers on the screen start falling, you don't just lose money. You lose your sense of self. That is by design. Now, the third stage, the silence. This is the part that makes me angriest, because this is where character enters the story and almost always fails. After every crash, there is a brief window, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, where the public is furious. Hearings are held, commissions are formed. Stern-faced senators pound tables and demand answers. Newspapers run investigations. Books are written. And then, slowly, quietly, the silence settles in. The regulations that were passed get watered down. The agencies that were created get defunded. The executives who should have gone to prison get hired as consultants instead. And within a decade, sometimes less, the whole machine is running again, louder than before. After 1929, we got the Glass-Steagall Act. It was simple. It said, commercial banks, the ones holding your savings, can't also be investment banks, the ones making wild bets. It was a wall between your money and their casino, and it worked. For over 60 years, it worked. We didn't have a single systemic banking crisis in that entire period. Then, in 1999, they tore it down. Exposed like demolishing a dam and acting surprised when the valley floods. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, signed by President Clinton with enthusiastic bipartisan support. Republicans wrote it. Democrats signed it. Wall Street lobbied for it. And the American public barely noticed because the dot-com bubble was making everyone feel rich. 8 years later, the flood came. 2008. And here's where the character test gets really interesting, because 2008 wasn't just a financial crisis. It was a moral X-ray. It showed us exactly who people really were underneath the suits and the slogans. Let me tell you about two men, real people. Both worked at major financial institutions. Both saw what was coming. One was a trader at a big investment bank. He realized in 2006 that the mortgage-backed securities his firm was selling to pension funds and retirement accounts were, to put it plainly, garbage. Loans given to people who could never pay them back, bundled together, stamped with a AAA rating by agencies that were being paid by the very banks issuing the securities, and sold as safe investments to teachers and firefighters and retirees. This trader had a choice. He could blow the whistle, or he could bet against the very products his own firm was selling. He chose the bet. He made hundreds of millions of dollars. His firm eventually collapsed, but he walked away rich. He was celebrated in books and movies as some kind of genius. Nobody ever asks the obvious question. If he knew the bomb was going to go off, why didn't he warn the people standing next to it? The second man worked at a regional bank, much smaller operation. He saw the same patterns, the same rotten loans, the same impossible math. He went to his boss. His boss told him to shut up and keep selling. He went to the regulators. The regulators told him they were aware of the situation and were monitoring it. He went to a journalist. The journalist said the story was too complicated for readers to understand, so this man quit his job. He cashed out his retirement, moved his family to a smaller house, and started writing a blog that almost nobody read, warning about what was coming. When the crash hit, he was proven right. He didn't make a dime from being right. He lost his career, most of his savings, and his marriage. Last I heard, he was working as a financial advisor in a strip mall in Ohio, helping middle-class families understand their 401k statements. Two men, same information, same crisis, completely different choices. One chose profit, one chose principle. The system rewarded the first and punished the second. And that, right there, is the machine working exactly as it's designed to work. Now let me bring this forward, because the next crisis is not some distant hypothetical. The ingredients are already in the pot. Let me walk you through what's simmering. Global debt, sovereign, corporate, and household combined, is north of $300 trillion. That's not a typo. 300 trillion. To put that in perspective, the entire global economy produces roughly $100 trillion worth of goods and services in a year. So we owe 3 times what we make. If you ran your household this way, every financial advisor on the planet would tell you you're heading for bankruptcy. But when governments do it, they call it monetary policy and give each other awards. Interest rates were held near zero for over a decade after 2008. That wasn't charity. That was a choice. It meant that anyone with assets, stocks, real estate, private equity, saw their wealth explode. And anyone without assets, anyone who just had a job and a savings account, watched their purchasing power slowly evaporate like water on hot pavement. The Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars. The European Central Bank printed trillions of euros. The Bank of Japan has been printing so much money for so long that it now owns more than half of the Japanese government bond market. Think about that. The central bank of the third largest economy on earth is essentially lending money to itself. It's an Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. And everyone in a position of authority says, this is fine. This is normal. This is under control. It is not under control. Commercial real estate is sitting on a time bomb. Office buildings in every major city are 30, 40, 50% empty. The owners of those buildings took out enormous loans based on pre-pandemic occupancy rates. Those loans are coming due. The buildings aren't worth what they were. The banks holding those loans know this. They're just not talking about it. They're using accounting tricks to avoid marking the losses, the same way a gambler hides his losing tickets and only shows his wife the winners. The regional banks, the small and mid-sized ones that actually lend to local businesses and home buyers, are the most exposed. And if they start going under, the contagion spreads fast. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. It's not the debt. It's not the empty offices. It's not even the inflation that quietly steals 2 or 3% of your savings every single year, like a pickpocket with a government badge. It's the character deficit. We have built a civilization that systematically selects for cowardice in its leadership class. Think about what it takes to rise to the top of a major bank, a government agency, a central bank. You don't get there by telling uncomfortable truths. You get there by going along, by not rocking the boat, by smiling at the right people and nodding at the right meetings, and never, ever saying, this doesn't add up. The people running the system are not evil. That would almost be easier to deal with. There's something more dangerous. They're obedient. They've been trained their entire careers to optimize for short-term results and ignore long-term consequences. They don't see the cliff because they've been rewarded for only looking at their feet. And that pattern extends to all of us, because this isn't just a story about bankers and politicians. It's a story about the choices you and I make every single day. Do you look at your finances honestly? Or do you look away because the truth is uncomfortable? Do you carry debt that you know, deep down, is unsustainable? Do you invest in things you don't understand because someone on a screen told you it was a sure thing? Do you measure your life by what you own or by who you are when everything you own is taken away? The ancient Stoics had a concept they called the reserve clause. Whenever they made a plan, whenever they set a goal, they added a silent caveat. If fate allows. They pursued ambition with everything they had, but they held their outcomes loosely because they understood something that our culture has completely forgotten. You don't control the world. You only control your response to it. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth in his time, wrote in his private journal, which was never meant to be published, that the things you own and the titles you carry are smoke. They drift. They vanish. The only thing that's real is the quality of your mind and the integrity of your actions. He wrote that while managing a plague that killed between 5 and 10 million people across the Roman Empire. He wrote that while fighting a war on the northern frontier that he didn't start and couldn't avoid. He wrote that not as philosophy. He wrote it as survival instructions. And that's what I want to leave you with. Not a list of stocks to buy. Not a prediction about when the crash will come. Not a bunker blueprint or a gold bug manifesto. Something more useful. A mirror. The next crisis will come. Maybe this year. Maybe in 3 years. Maybe it's already started and we just haven't named it yet. When it arrives, the financial system will do what it always does. It will seize up. The headlines will scream. The experts will stammer. The politicians will point fingers. And you will be standing in the middle of it, just like Arthur Berman in 1929, just like millions of ordinary people in 2008, staring at a number on a screen that no longer makes sense. In that moment, the money won't matter. What will matter is whether you built your life on things that can be taken from you or on things that can't. Your skills, your relationships, your ability to stay calm when everyone around you is panicking. Your willingness to tell the truth when lying would be easier. Your capacity to help someone else when you're barely keeping your own head above water. That's the test. Not currency, character. And the time to study for it is not when the exam is on your desk. It's now, right now. While the lights are still on and the ATMs still work and you still have the luxury of choice. Because here's the final secret, the one that Wall Street and Washington and every financial guru with a podcast will never, ever tell you. The people who survive financial crises, and I mean really survive them, not just financially but as human beings, are not the ones with the most money. They're the ones who knew who they were before the money disappeared. They had a sense of identity that wasn't for sale. They had relationships that weren't transactional. They had skills that didn't require a bull market to be valuable. In 1932, at the absolute bottom of the Great Depression, when unemployment was north of 25%, and bread lines stretched around city blocks and grown men wept in public without shame, there were people who held their families together. There were neighbors who shared what little they had. There were communities that organized, not for profit, but for survival. Nobody wrote books about them. Nobody made movies about them. They didn't become billionaires or senators. They just did the right thing when doing the right thing was the hardest possible option. And that, more than any chart or indicator or algorithm, is what you should be investing in. Not in assets, in yourself, in the kind of person who can stand in the wreckage and still be worth something. Because the next crisis won't ask what's in your wallet. It will ask what's in your spine, and you better have an answer.